If you believe in Sean Payton and the Broncos and the direction they are headed, like today's video. And even if you don't believe it, let's be honest, it's the only option the Broncos have. They have put all their eggs in the Sean Payton basket, so hit the thumbs up button to get some good vibes going. Coming up on today's show, I've got my final thoughts on Russell Wilson as that era is over now, and then we're going to run through some Russell Wilson replacement options for the Broncos. But let me start off by going through both sides of the coin here, beginning with the Broncos side, which is Sean Payton wanting to move on from Russell Wilson. If I had to defend Sean Payton in this decision, I would say the Russell Wilson trade was a mistake. There's no denying that. I don't think you'll find one person other than Russell Wilson, Ciara, and the rest of his camp that believe it was not a mistake. So, if you know it's a mistake, it's best to just move on from it, right? And I think that was the overarching theme for the Broncos. Yes, there was some back-channeling going on when they asked him to switch around some language on his contract, and that didn't happen, which ultimately led to him getting benched, and then there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. But in my eyes, Sean Payton knew the trade was a mistake. They were not going to win a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson, so why are you wasting your time? Let's just cut bait now. And if you've got the richest owners in the NFL who don't mind paying $39 million in cash for a player to not be on your team, then maybe you should go do it. But if I'm defending Russell Wilson on the other side, I would say he improved from 2022. He came to the Broncos when it didn't seem like he was truly their number one quarterback option, right? They hired Nathaniel Hackett in hopes of luring Aaron Rodgers. That did not happen, so they pivot and they go to Russell Wilson, and it's disastrous first year, but a strong bounce-back season in 2023. Still not where they wanted him to be and where they thought he was following his time in Seattle, but was he so bad you were willing to eat an $85 million dead cap hit? In my eyes, no, because who are you going to find that's better? Probably no one, unless you really hit the lottery in the draft and you find some hidden gem in the third day of the draft, or J.J. McCarthy turns out to be what some people think he is going to be, which is the next messiah of this draft class. And yeah, then you'll look back and you go, ultimately, it didn't matter. Similar to the 49ers, right? They had a disastrous trade up for Trey Lance. That didn't work, but all that got covered up because they found Brock Purdy with the last pick of the draft. Are the Broncos going to find their Brock Purdy in this draft class? Probably not. It's a long shot to find those guys in day 3, but it does happen from time to time. So who is Denver going to find that's any better than Russell Wilson? Probably no one, but like I said earlier, if you know it's a mistake, maybe it's best to just move on. So I think those are the two sides of the argument for keeping Russell Wilson and moving on from Russell Wilson. I ultimately lean more towards the you should have kept Russell Wilson. I don't think you're going to find an improvement. I ultimately think that this was a move because Sean Payton and Russell Wilson did not gel very well together, and Sean Payton just wanted to go out and start a new quarterback process sooner rather than later. But in my eyes, if you were hired to be the head coach and there's a guy with a huge contract on the team, you should probably give it more than just one season before pulling the plug. But hopefully that's the last time we ever have to see what Denver gave up to get Russell Wilson. And then this will be the last time we ever talk about what they paid Russell Wilson not too long later before he ever took a snap for the team. 5-year, $245 million contract extension. Did not play a single year on that extension. Just rode out the 2 remaining years on his Seahawks extension or Seahawks contract, and now he's cut 2 seasons after his time in Denver. It's also a miracle, I'll add, to wrap up this portion of the show, that George Paton was not fired. Traded for Russell Wilson, which in his defense, how many people on March 16th, 2022 thought that was a bad trade? The entire NFL landscape celebrated the Broncos. George Paton was the next up-and-coming hotshot GM at the time. Then he extends Russell Wilson, and it's a disaster. So George Paton is very lucky to still have his job right now because that was a colossal and beyond imaginable expensive mistake, both in terms of the ownership's money and the team's draft assets, which is like currency to these teams, right? You are spending draft picks. It is their monopoly money, and he lost on both fronts, and how he still has a job is a little bit beyond me. But when did you know the trade was a disaster. I know that there were some people who would go back as far as before week 1 of 2022 when Russell Wilson was in Europe for the Grand Prix for the F1 in Monaco. And they're like, why is he over there taking his PJ back and forth? Should he be practicing? And they were laughed at, and I laughed at them. And, well, maybe they were onto something. But let me know when you knew the trade was a disaster. I knew Hackett was a disaster in week 1 when he completely botched the Seahawks game. And I would say I had a very bad feeling about Russell Wilson as early as their next week when they beat the Texans at home. But it was the ugliest win I ever saw for a team that was that talented. And I had a bad feeling at that point. Now, let's talk about some replacements for Russell Wilson, right? The reason why you clicked on to today's video. We're going to run through the different avenues that the Broncos can go down to replace Russell Wilson, and then we'll wrap up with my top 5 most likely options to be the starting quarterback in 2024. But the most likely replacement, it's not a fun one, it's not a sexy one, but it's the current starter, Jarrett Stidham, right? The guy who ended the season starting. It's him and Ben DiNucci on the roster right now, and I don't think it's going to be the Gooch. So Jarrett Stidham, in my eyes, is the most likely option. I think it is his job to lose. He played the last 2 games of the season. I don't think he looked any better or any worse than Russell Wilson did throughout the 2023 season. I don't think he provided a spark. I don't think he was tossed in a situation where you can truly come out of it with a very clear idea as to who Jarrett Stidham is as a starter. But for now, it is Jarrett Stidham's job to lose. How quickly he loses that job potentially is very much up in the air. Does he lose it because they signed Kirk Cousins in free agency? If that's the case, then he loses it the moment Kirk Cousins is signed. Or does he go into training camp for a battle with a rookie, which leads us to the next avenue for Denver to find their next starting quarterback, the NFL draft. If the Broncos go out and draft a quarterback, I still think Jarrett Stidham will have the starting job going into OTAs and minicamp, which is not uncommon. I don't think even Bryce Young had the start. Oh, maybe Bryce Young did, but a lot of rookies, even that are picked very high, don't have the starting job. CJ Stroud? He had to win it? Okay, he had to win over Davis Mills. Yeah. So it's not completely out of the ordinary for a team to draft a rookie and then have him still win the job in training camp. But let's talk about some of the quarterbacks in this draft class. Just cross off Caleb Williams. I would say cross off Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels, barring a dramatic trade-up, and I don't think Denver's got the ammunition, nor are they going to find a trade partner to execute that kind of trade. J.J. McCarthy is very interesting. Some people think he could creep top 10. If that's the case, Denver would have to move up to get him, and we'll talk more about McCarthy in a moment. Michael Penix and Bo Nix definitely feel like solid round 2 targets. However, the Denver Broncos do not have a round 2 pick, so they would either have to trade up or pray he falls to them in round 3, which could happen. Joe Milton, Michael Pratt, Spencer Rattler, and Jordan Travis are all of your day 3 guys. If Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, and Jayden Daniels go 1, 2, 3 in the draft, the Denver Broncos do not trade up for J.J. McCarthy, and he goes to the Falcons at 8, for example. And then Penix and Nix both go round 2. All of a sudden, Denver goes, well, we don't want to reach on one of those next 4 QBs with our 3rd round pick, so we'll take whoever's available the next time we're on the clock in the 3rd day of the draft. That's the layout I think all 3 of those quarterbacks' paths could have. But J.J. McCarthy is definitely the most intriguing option of the bunch because he's sort of right in that no man's land where he's not as glued to the top end of the draft like Williams, Maye, and Daniels are, but he's also not a surefire thing where I could see Denver pulling the trigger on him at number 12. No questions asked. It's a miracle if he even falls there. I can see J.J. McCarthy being a Sean Payton type project where he feels like this is a guy that I could have him sit behind Jarrett Stidham for a year, kind of groom him, get him into my system, learn the way I want to play football. I want my quarterback to play football and go from there. So definitely keep an eye on J.J. McCarthy. I do think that a lot of other dominoes have to fall for the Broncos to maybe get J.J. McCarthy. Like, for example, let's say the Atlanta Falcons don't get Kirk Cousins or Justin Fields. Cousins stays in Minnesota, and Justin Fields gets traded somewhere else. all of a sudden the Falcons, picking 4 spots ahead of Atlanta, are definitely in the market for a quarterback come draft time. Same goes for the Vikings. Now, let's say the Vikings lose Kirk Cousins, right? And they're looking for a quarterback. Well, they are 1 spot ahead of the Broncos, so if they wanted to move up like Denver, they are likely going to put together a better trade package since the Broncos don't even have a second rounder to begin with this year to offer. And whichever team was trading with Minnesota or Denver would absolutely pick Minnesota since they would only fall back to 11 compared to 12. Although if they're trading within the division or the conference, maybe they decide to go with the Broncos instead. So that's the trade route, and that's how I see it unfolding in my eyes. Keep an eye on J.J. McCarthy. We have more quarterbacks to talk about in just a moment, but I was browsing Fanatics, as I love to do, and I noticed this T-shirt jersey, little jersey action for Patrick Surtain is nearly half off. It is 45% off. They're basically paying you to go get this awesome Pat Surtain T-shirt jersey. So with the summer months coming here, wearing an NFL jersey in the summer can be a bit hot and a bit extra, but getting a nice T-shirt jersey, a nice jersey, that's a much more cool way to rock your favorite team and support your favorite player potentially. So get it today. The link is chatsports.com/PS2. I put it in the comments and description of today's video in case you can't remember like 12 letters. All right, switch gears now. Let's talk about free agent quarterbacks. Okay. Denver's not going to get Kirk Cousins. I think he's going to stay in Minnesota, and if it's not Minnesota, it's Atlanta. Plus, the Broncos just don't have the budget to pay Kirk Cousins what he is looking for. Baker Mayfield is definitely intriguing. I think he's going to stay in Tampa, but if he were to hit the open market, I'm in the same boat as I am for Kirk Cousins. I don't see a way Denver affords Baker. However, he would be cheaper, and so it's got a 2% chance of happening more than Kirk Cousins does. Gardner Minshew, I also think, is just going to be a little bit too expensive, but if his price were to drop, that would be a guy to keep an eye on. Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, Mitchell Trubisky. Big drop-off after the first 3 guys in my eyes. I like Brissett the most of the bunch right there. I think he's going to get around $8 to $9 million, and as sad as this may sound, that may be too much for the amount of cap space the Broncos are going to be working with. Jameis Winston, Sam Darnold, and Joe Flacco are all in a very unique boat, we'll say, where Jameis has the connection to Sean Payton going back to their time in New Orleans. Sam Darnold has received a lot of praise after backing up Brock Purdy for a year, and Joe Flacco comes off winning NFL Comeback Player of the Year. But what about Jimmy Garoppolo? And this is not going to do me any favors talking about him. And I'm not going to stand here and act like this is a good option. But it might be their only option, right? The other quarterback simply might be too expensive given how much of the Broncos' quarterback room is already eating up their cap space, given Russell Wilson's contract and Jarrett Stidham signed a 2-year, $10 million contract. I don't think they're going to spend similar money on another quarterback this offseason. But Jimmy Garoppolo is going to come as cheap as they come once the Raiders inevitably release him. It's not fun, it's not exciting, but it might be the best option. Finally, we land at quarterback trade targets. Not a ton of trade targets to watch for in my eyes, especially with Denver not having great trade ammunition to work with. Like, they're not going to give up their 12th pick for anyone, and they don't have a second, and they only have a third in day 2. So they're sort of in this no man's land of, what are you going to give up and for who? But Sam Howell is definitely an intriguing option because if the Commanders, which I fully expect, go quarterback second overall, I could see them moving on from Sam Howell if they get a good option. When you look at what Sam Howell did last year, the entire body of work looks okay. Like 3,900 yards, 21 touchdowns. All right, we can work with that. But the way he ended the year compared to the way he started it just completely fell off a cliff. Like, we saw a guy in week 2 in Denver that looked like a pretty awesome quarterback in my eyes. But then the way he ended the year, going from 17 touchdowns and 9 interceptions the first 10 weeks of the season to 4 touchdowns and 12 interceptions the last 7-8 games of the year, his stock's not very high in my eyes, and maybe that lowers his price a little bit. So for that reason, I would at least explore a Sam Howell trade. The Commanders' organization is just a complete dumpster fire. So I always want to give players the benefit of the doubt of, well, if something were to go wrong in Washington, It's not on the player. It's on the entire organization and franchise for failing him. And maybe that's what happened when the writing was on the wall towards the end, that they were going to suck, and if they were going to suck, they might as well go draft a new quarterback. So that could be a potential option. I would not give up a third-round pick for Sam Howell, maybe a day 3 pick, and if that trade does not work out because Sam Howell's not the guy, worst case scenario, you're out a 5th or 6th round draft pick. If it does work out, you are the ultimate chess player because you got Sam Howell for a 5th round pick, and he's your new franchise quarterback. So I would at least explore a Sam Howell trade. Now, one other guy to keep an eye on is Justin Fields. We know the Bears are trading him. They're going to go Caleb Williams first overall. So does Denver want to collect the quarterback that they passed on back in the 2021 NFL draft? I personally don't see Sean Payton pursuing a Justin Fields trade. Sean Payton is looking for a quarterback that resembles a lot more of what he had in Drew Brees back in New Orleans. That's not Justin Fields. But I also think it's a little shallow-minded to think he only wants Drew Brees. Well, yeah, like a little bit of a no-shit Sherlock. Who wouldn't want an NFL Hall of Fame quarterback? There might not be that type of quarterback at that level available this offseason. So maybe he feels like Justin Fields is a really good quarterback that sure isn't similar to the quarterbacks he's worked with before, but maybe he's their best option, and he feels like the Bears coaching staff, which I believe, failed Justin Fields, and with better coaching and better talent around him, he could be more successful in a new setting. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but it's one name to keep an eye on. Now, before we get on out of here, I do want to get this question on screen. What is your nightmare starter for Denver Week 1? What's the name that you have seen tossed out there as, keep an eye on this guy to be the Broncos quarterback, that you just will not watch them play if he is their starting quarterback Week 1? Get in the comment section below. For me, nightmare starter, God, Jimmy Garoppolo would be a nightmare starter. And how nightmare would it be if it's Jimmy G starting for the Broncos and Russell Wilson starting for the Raiders Week 1 in Las Vegas and the Raiders win again? That is just nightmare fuel all over again. Here are the top 5 QB options in my eyes, though. I think the number 1 most likely starter is Jarrett Stidham. After that, I think it's J.J. McCarthy, because if he's available at 12, I could see the Broncos going that direction, but I don't see a way they could jump up to get a top 3 quarterback, but maybe they can go from 12 to 8 if the Falcons get like Justin Fields, for example, or Kirk Cousins. Jameis Winston and Sam Darnold from the free agency side, they're going to be a lot cheaper than the other free agent quarterbacks. One's got a connection with Sean Payton, and the other one is just better than Mitch Trubisky. So that's really why he's on there. And then finally, a day 3 draft pick, right? A random Joe Milton, Spencer Rattler, Michael Pratt, a guy that just flew under the radar. The Broncos decided to throw a dart at the board on the 3rd day of the draft, and it hits, and, well, ultimately the entire Russell Wilson saga is covered up because they kind of drafted their own Russell Wilson, a later-ish draft pick that blossomed into an awesome starting quarterback. That will do it for us on today's show. I really appreciate everyone for tuning into this edition of the Broncos Breakdown. We will sign off and see you all later.